Hello, friends and jewelry lovers, and welcome back to Ancient History Jewelry Stories, your favorite niche podcast about jewelry history. You may have noticed that there was no podcast episode 2 weeks ago, and that today's episode is coming out on a Friday. There will be no apologies on my end. I have made it abundantly clear that I have no sense of consistency, and that I am not good at keeping to schedules. If that sounds like an executive function disorder to you, you are correct. I was also traveling for 3 weeks, and my trips are never relaxing vacations. They are 10 miles of walking a day, multiple museums, talking my husband's ear off about all manner of facts and interesting tidbits from history. You get the idea. So I needed to regroup, gather my thoughts, and now I'm back with this little shorty episode about a topic I haven't actually covered despite getting 11 months into this year and having a birthstone series for each month. What are birthstones, and how did we even come up with this list? Before I get into the details, I do want to introduce myself for anyone who is coming in blind here. My name is Melise, and I am a goldsmith trained in ancient techniques. If you aren't already watching my videos and you stumbled upon this podcast out of the blue, welcome. I'm happy to have you here. I have a video series called Ancient History Jewelry Stories, where I discuss exactly that, jewelry history. It's not all ancient, but it is all interesting. And for the last 11 months, I have been focusing on each month's birthstone, or in the case of some months, birthstones. If you would like to find those videos, you can watch them on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube under the username moonhoney.jewelry. Each first of the month starts with an introduction to the stone or stones that we're going to discuss, and every Friday we have another video. We're already in November, and we're halfway through the month. That means that there are 10 and a half months worth of birthstone videos for you to catch up on if you haven't watched them yet. And because this is going to be a shorter episode, I'm going to skip all of the plugs and the links until the end and get right down to business. The history of birthstones. If you're someone who even cares at all about birthstones, then you might love your birthstone or you might hate it. They seem to be pretty polarizing, and part of that has to do with the fact that we don't choose our own birthstones. They've been chosen for us. Yes, people will argue that birthstones are nothing more than a marketing tactic, and in some way, they definitely are. But the history of birthstones actually goes back a lot farther than most people expect. In fact, the history is literally biblical. The initial idea of birthstones can be traced back to the Breastplate of Aaron, which was a priestly breastplate, also known as the Breastplate of Judgment, which I love. It is a wonderfully dramatic name, that was set with 4 rows of 3 stones. Each of these 12 stones would have been representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel and would have been inscribed with the name of each tribe. This appears first in the book of Exodus, which is the second book of the Bible in the Old Testament. Unfortunately, because this is a concept dating back thousands of years, there is a lot of disagreement about what these 12 stones would have been. We're going off of Hebrew translations and ancient Greek translations, and some of these words are not in use anymore, and some of these words describe stones that now have completely different names. So I'll go down the list, but a lot of these stones are just best guesses by modern scholars. The first stone is thought to be either sard or carnelian. The second, which was called topazios, was probably actually peridot, because up until the 18th century, peridot was known as topazios. The third would have been emerald, or more likely, green onyx or black onyx. The fourth is something called carbuncle, which once upon a time would have referred to just about any red stone, maybe garnet, maybe carnelian, but there's also a chance that it was turquoise or malachite, 2 stones which are not red, although carbuncle is red. The fifth was probably lapis. The sixth is described as honey-colored, so maybe citrine, maybe hessianite garnet. The seventh would be another yellow stone, so amber or maybe hyacinth, which is yellow zircon. The eighth is agate or obsidian. The 9th is one of the only ones we can be sure of. That's amethyst. The 10th would have been green jasper or serpentine. The 11th would have been a stone known as heliodor, which is a light green beryl, not dark enough to be considered emerald, but in the same family. Or, possibly, cat's eye. And the 12th is a stone that's described by color. It's either green or red and was probably another form of beryl. So, having heard that list of contradicting ideas, it doesn't really clarify anything at all, does it? That just makes the concept more confusing. How did this breastplate of Aaron come to be associated with our modern birthstones? Well, the first person to make a connection between these 12 stones and the 12 months of the year, as well as the 12 zodiac signs, was a first-century historian by the name of Josephus. He was a Roman Jewish historian who wrote 2 different lists of these stones that also compete with each other, probably going off of ancient Hebrew translations. And you'll notice I mentioned zodiac signs, although those don't line up with the beginning and end of a month, so they don't necessarily align with the birthstones by month that we're familiar with. In the 8th and 9th centuries in Europe, religious treatises were written that associated different gemstones with different saints. Although at this point, they still would not have been considered birthstones for the wearer personally, and you would have had a set of 12 stones, and you would have worn one each month. Of course, having 12 different stones that you can wear throughout the year would have been prohibitively expensive for most people. This would have been relegated to people in the church and probably royalty. Sometime in the 16th century, the practice of wearing a stone for your own birth month became a little bit more common throughout Europe, although it was likely still something reserved for the very wealthy or royalty. This concept continued to grow as a, frankly, marketing idea, probably goldsmiths and jewelers pushing this idea onto people so they could sell more stones, until the late 1800s. In the 1870s, we see a book of poems published by Tiffany and Company that had a poem for each month of the year about a specific birthstone. This poetry book was published as having no identified author, which leads me to believe that Tiffany and Company probably sat someone down and made them write a whole bunch of poems about birthstones. Given the love of symbolism and sentimentality in Victorian-era Europe and the United States, this does seem like a very clever bit of marketing on their part. Of course, by this time, birthstones didn't really have any religious associations anymore, which leads us to the creation of the first standardized list of birthstones. In 1912, the American National Association of Jewelers, who are now called the Jewelers of America, met in Kansas, of all places, to create this standardized list. While they did use the ancient birthstones as their starting point, the focus was really on creating a list that included more clear gemstones that could be faceted in order to make what are called mother's rings, which some of you have probably given your mother for Mother's Day in the past. Those are rings that have the birthstone of each child set together, and in my opinion, those generally end up pretty ugly because a lot of these stones don't look very good next to each other. So the focus of this list was really on finding stones that could be faceted so that you didn't have this odd mix of cabochon cut and faceted stones in one piece of jewelry. The list was altered a few more times after that. In 1952, another group, the Jewelry Industry Council of America, which sounds so official, added alexandrite for June, pink tourmaline for October, although I don't think we should limit it to just pink, and citrine for November, once it was discovered that amethyst could be heat-treated to create an abundance of citrine. They replaced December's original stone of lapis with blue zircon, and they switched the primary and secondary stones for March. It used to be that bloodstone was the primary stone and aquamarine was the alternative, but bloodstone kind of fell out of favor after the 19th century, so aquamarine became the primary and bloodstone the alternative. Then, once again in 2002, the American Gem Trade Association, along with Jewelers of America, added tanzanite for December. And in 2016, spinel was added for August. This brings us to the modern list as it stands in 2024. This is the list that I use when I make my videos. This is the list that is most accepted in countries throughout the world, not just the United States, although some countries have their own alternative stones and their own ideas about birthstones. So bear with me while I read through this long list of all of the gemstones for the year. January has the stone of garnet. February is amethyst. March is aquamarine and bloodstone. April is diamond. May is emerald. June has 3 stones: pearl, moonstone, and alexandrite. July has ruby. August has sardonyx, peridot, and spinel. If you're not familiar with sardonyx, it is the multicolored layered stone that is often used for carving cameos. September has sapphire. October has opal and pink tourmaline, but I think we should say all tourmaline. November has topaz and citrine, being one of the only months that has 2 stones that look nearly identical, although topaz does come in other colors besides golden yellow. December has turquoise, zircon, and tanzanite. And you'll notice that all of the months have at least one transparent stone that can be cut as a faceted stone versus cabochon. Of course, there is also an official British list. This doesn't really differ that much from the official American list. There are a few minor differences. They've added rock crystal for April, probably because diamonds are very expensive. They've added chrysoprase for May, probably also because emeralds are very expensive. They added carnelian for July, same reason. Rubies, very expensive. For September, they've added lapis, kind of taken it from what was dropped off of December. Again, sapphires, very expensive. The British list does not include tourmaline for October, and it also does not include zircon for December, but otherwise, the lists are identical. There is also a list based on zodiac signs, and some of these do overlap with the months, some of them do not. Some of them are, in my opinion, rather boring stones. Generally, the zodiac cycle starts with Aries, but going off of the beginning of the year so that we can line up these stones, the stone for Aquarius is garnet, which is also the stone for January. The stone for Pisces is amethyst, which is the stone for February. The stone for Aries is bloodstone, the original stone for March. The stone for Taurus is sapphire, which is not the stone for April. The stone for Gemini is agate. The stone for Cancer is emerald. The stone for Leo is onyx, and I, as a Leo, am sort of offended by that one. I find that to be a rather boring option. The stone for Virgo is carnelian. Libra is chrysolite. Scorpio is beryl, which is very vague. Beryl comes in so many colors, including emerald and aquamarine. Sagittarius is topaz. And Capricorn is ruby, which I am also personally offended by. My birthday is in July. That is my birthstone. But I guess if you've never been satisfied with any of your birth month birthstone options, see if there's something in the zodiac list that speaks to you. I don't want to make it sound like birthstones are a purely Eurocentric idea, because there are other versions of birthstones throughout the world. The most well-known is probably the one based on Hindu astrology. These stones are chosen by which planet rules your sign. The sun is associated with ruby, the moon, pearl. For Mars, it's red coral. Mercury, it's emerald. Jupiter, it's yellow sapphire. For Saturn, it's blue sapphire. For Venus, it's diamond. And then we have 2 concepts. They are not actual physical planets, but they are spaces where the sun and the moon's orbits intersect. The first is Rahu, which is also known as the north node of the moon, and that's associated with Hessianite garnet. And the other is Ketu, which is the opposite, the south node of the moon, and that's associated with cat's eye. In this particular set of beliefs surrounding birthstones, both the size and type of stone you're supposed to wear are dictated by your birthday. Hopefully, this gives you a little bit more information and depth when it comes to the idea of wearing birthstones. A lot of people love their birthstone, but just as many don't. And then there are people who are simply neutral about the concept, which is perfectly fine. But I wanted to dispel the idea that birthstones come purely from a marketing standpoint. Yes, that is a hefty dose of what's going on with the modern lists, but the idea of birthstones have been around for over 2,000 years. It's said that the Hindu birthstones can be dated back to 1500 BCE. I don't know if that's exactly true, but it's clear that that concept has been around for much longer than our modern idea of marketable, pretty-looking stones. And it's definitely been around a lot longer than the concept of giving your mother a mother's ring with all of the stones of her children side by side. This episode was a little short, but next one is going to be one of the deep dives that I have missed doing for you guys. I haven't chosen the topic just yet. I've got 2 weeks to get it together, and I'm going to be putting another poll up on my Patreon so that my Patreon subscribers can help me choose what the next episode is going to be about. I did that for the last episode about the history of filigree, and I want to do it again for the next one. I say this in almost every single podcast episode, but I am stubborn. I do not take requests. I have 1,000 ideas in my head, and I'd like to get them all out before I start taking other people's ideas. But you can have a say in the kind of content I make by joining my Patreon at the $5 a month tier. Every once in a while, I put out a poll, and I hope to be doing it more often, especially now that the year is almost over, and I'm not going to be making a whole new series of birthstone videos next year, which frees up some extra space to get people involved in what kind of content I make. You can find my Patreon at patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories. Next week, I will also be uploading a member-exclusive video showing all of the incredible things I saw at the museums I visited on my trips to Turkey and France, including me nerding the fuck out about the original lead model of the French blue diamond, which was stolen and then reappeared as the Hope diamond. There's going to be a lot of glittery, beautiful stuff to look at. You can also find my merch at merch.shopmoonhoney.com. There are quite a few of you walking around with that asshole Christopher Columbus tote bags. I'm one of them. We're starting a small army, and I'm hoping to add a little bit more merch before the holiday season is truly upon us. Although, who am I kidding? Thanksgiving is in less than 2 weeks. The holiday season is truly upon us. You can also find the jewelry that I make using mostly ancient techniques at shopmoonhoney.com. And as always, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube under moonhoney.jewelry. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for being here. And I will see you again in 2 weeks for more ancient history jewelry stories.